Hi, in today's lessons, I'm going to talk to you about the present perfect subjunctive. And to begin, we're going to jump back to just what is the subjunctive and how is it used. So we'll go back to the present subjunctive that you've learned in previous chapters. Remember, the subjunctive is going to be created by using two different clauses. We're going to have an independent clause, and there's going to be a subordinate clause or a dependent clause, meaning this clause is going to be dependent upon this clause. What does that mean exactly? It means that there has to be a very specific phrase or clause here in the independent clause in order to have the subjunctive in the subordinate clause over here. So we can't always use the subjunctive in a sentence unless there is a specific word or phrase or clause in the independent clause. So what are those clauses that trigger or that allow us to use the subjunctive in the subordinate clause? Let's take a look. There's a great way to remember some of those clauses, and that is with an acronym, WEIRDO. This is pretty common. You'll hear this in several different Spanish classes probably. WEIRDO stands for wish, emotion, and personal expressions, requests and recommendations, doubt and denial, and ojalá. I really like this list here. I would screenshot this or copy it somehow or take a picture because it gives you lots of examples of what falls under each of those categories. For example, wishes. A wish would be the verbs desear, desire, to prefer, to want, to need, to hope for, and so on. So it gives you examples under each of those. These are really common words that you're going to see as triggers in the independent clause here that set off the subjunctive over here. So these will be in the present tense in this clause over here. And this is where I get a lot of errors from students. They will put the subjunctive in this independent clause instead of putting just the regular present tense. So this is going to stay in the regular present tense for uses of this grammar topic, which is the present perfect subjunctive. So in the first clause, the independent clause, we will use present tense. Then you will have your K. So this is your formula. And then if you have used one of these expressions in the independent clause, then you will use the subjunctive over here on this side. And you should have already learned how to form the present subjunctive in a previous chapter or class. So let's take a look at their example here. We have yo espero, present tense. I have my connector K, and then I put in present subjunctive my verb over here in the dependent clause. Yo espero que Paco estudie mucho. I hope that he studies a lot. Again, we're talking about wishes, emotions, and personal expressions, requests and recommendations, doubt and denial, and ojalá. These are things that are not concrete. I think of these as the gray, wishy-washy feelings instead of the concrete black and white statements and factual statements. Okay, so if you want to think about the subjunctive as being that wishy-washy gray area, but again, we have to have two separate clauses, and that first clause, that independent clause, has to be a specific wish, emotion, and personal request, doubt, denial, ojalá, before we can use the subjunctive in the dependent clause. Okay, so how do we form, that previous example was in the present subjunctive. But we're not learning present subjunctive today. We are learning the present perfect subjunctive. Okay, and just like other perfect tenses, like the present and the past perfect tenses in the indicative, the present perfect subjunctive also has two components, and that is formed with haber in the subjunctive, and then the past participle. Remember, a past participle is a verb that we drop the AR, the ER, the IR, we drop the ending, we add ado or ido. We also have a couple that are yendo, like leer, oír. Okay, so what does that look like when it's put all together? Again, we have our independent clause in the present tense, I hope. We have our connector, K. we have to have a subject change. So it has to be that this person hopes that that person, I hope that you, we hope that they, she hopes that I, and so on. So there has to be a person changing who's doing the action. It has to be this person wishing, hoping, desire, requesting that this person does such and such. In this case, that this person has done such and such, because we're talking about the present subjunctive. Okay, so here, this is our first clause, our independent clause. Then we have our K, our connector. Then we have our subject change. So here's subject to. So it started I, hope that she. Then here is where we put our present perfect subjunctive. That whole thing should have been boxed. Sorry about that. So we have I, remember it's created by using aber plus the past participle. And for the present perfect subjunctive, we are going to form that with haya. So haber is going to change to haya comido. That's how we write it in the present subjunctive plus the past participle. Espero, I hope that she has eaten. Now remember, in the past we said she has eaten. Ella ha comido. She has eaten. But now we're saying, I hope that she has eaten. We've got our special clause, that's our trigger, that allows us to use the present perfect subjunctive over here. Remember, we have to have that trigger clause and the independent clause in order to use the subjunctive. So this phrase did not require subjunctive. It was just a statement. She has eaten. It's black and white, a factual statement. Here in our example, it says, I hope that she has eaten. Now it's a different ball of wax. We're talking about a hope. It is not a black and white statement. It's a gray area of somebody's wish or hope or desires. So we switch to the subjunctive tense. Okay, just something small to remember here. We never separate these two parts. So what they're talking about here is this. We never put anything in between here like haya no comido. You would never say that. This is a verb clause. It stays together. Just like when we learned about like reflexive verbs and indirect object pronouns and all those pronouns, they never interrupt the verb clauses. They never go in the middle. So verb clauses are going to stay together. We don't put anything in between there. Remember also that we have some past participles that are irregular. So these verbs over here, the ado, we had estudiado, we had hablado, we had comido. Then we have this list of irregulars, which again you should have learned when you initially learned the indicative of the present perfect or the past perfect. We learned these like he escrito, I have written, or había escrito, I had written. These are the same irregulars in the participle. But again, if you don't remember those, go ahead and take a screenshot or take a picture or write those down in your personal notes. Okay, so the use of the present perfect subjunctive. Again, let's take a look and analyze the difference here. We have present tense, we have our connector K, and then we have present subjunctive. Okay, so I hope that he studies a lot. Our I hope was the trigger, right? It's in the present tense. This is in the subjunctive tense. My dependent clause. Remember, this depends upon that trigger to change to the subjunctive. Let's try the next one. I hope, present tense, not the subjunctive. Remember, I said this is the number one error I get is that students want to put the subjunctive here in the independent clause. This is just simple present tense. So I'm going to take all of those way up here, that wish, emotion, desire, this desear, preferir, querer, necesitar, these are all going to be in present tense. These are not the words that are in the subjunctive. These are in present tense. These are present tense that trigger the subjunctive in the second clause or the dependent clause, okay? Those are the words that are going to be in present tense. A lot of times I'll see students put yo espere, and they'll put it in the subjunctive here, and then over here it's a big hot mess. So these are in the independent clauses in the present tense to form the present perfect subjunctive. So we have present tense, we have our connector still. Then again, we had that aber plus the participle in the subjunctive, right? that we just learned to form the present perfect. Haya estudiado, right? They dropped the air at ado mucho. I hope that he has studied a lot. Versus él ha estudiado mucho. This means he has studied a lot. This is a black and white statement in the indicative. There's no subjunctive. Take a look at the difference between this and this. This is in the subjunctive because it's a hope, wish, desired, request, and so on. It's a trigger with our connector K, and we have a subject change. We have I hope that Paco, right? We have to have a subject change, and then that has set off the subjunctive because it had that trigger phrase of esperar in the present tense. So what's this one? You've already seen this also. This is the past subjunctive. I hoped that he studied. That was our past subjunctive that we learned in the previous chapter if you're in my Spanish class. Okay, so this is the one we're learning now. Same concepts follow. We still have the same structure. We have present tense in the independent clause. We have K, and then it sets off the subjunctive in the dependent clause. It's just now that we're doing the present perfect subjunctive in that dependent clause instead of the last chapter where we did the past subjunctive. And in the previous chapter before that, we did present subjunctive, right? So we had present, subjunctive, past perfect, right? He has studied. And this was past subjunctive. All of them are in the subjunctive because they had that special trigger in the independent clause. Okay, I hope that clarifies things for you a little bit. If you have any questions, let me know.